Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gina. If you're new here, so am I.
I'm new. I just moved here.
I'd like to extend an invitation to join me if you're interested in history, and mystery, and true crime, and paranormal activities, and any of the above. Join me, hang out with me, so that we can talk about these things together. Today, I want to talk about the Tulsa Race Riots, or the Tulsa Race Massacre. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about it, let's get started. Segregation was very prominent during these times. Because of that, many Black Americans wanted to seek some economic independence from a society that was rejecting them. About 100 all-Black communities were established between the 1870s and the beginning of World War I. One of these communities was Greenwood, which was located in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was a very successful community. It had around 45 grocery stores, 30 restaurants, dentist offices, schools, churches, anything that you could think of, it had it. I do want to backtrack a little bit though to the beginning of Tulsa. Tulsa itself didn't exist until around the 1820s when the Creek Nation, which is a nation of Native Americans, were forced out of their homes in Georgia and Alabama, and they were made to seek another place to live. They settled in what is presently known as Tulsa, and there they began a life of cattle raising. Eventually, some white ranchers came in and they began a ranch town in the community. And then railroads showed up, and as you know, with railroads there comes a lot of workers from different backgrounds and then a community that follows them to be able to sustain them. So more people started pouring in, and then it became an oil town, and even more people showed up. With more people showing up, of course, more crime is going to happen, as well as more other stuff, but white residents that had been there for a long time already, the traditional ranchers that had lived there, they saw the crime and they blamed all of these new people, all these newcomers, for that crime. Resentment began to grow between these white Americans and the newcomers, and many of the newcomers were minorities. So in 1907, when Tulsa officially became a city, Senate Bill No. 1 was passed, and Senate Bill No. 1 stated that segregation was to be the law of the land. Even though it didn't have to be strictly enforced, Black Americans were still not able to vote, and so essentially they were disenfranchised. I imagine that made them feel unwanted. It made them feel like they weren't being treated equally, which they weren't. So they began their own community, which was called Greenwood. Greenwood became very, very successful, and these white Americans that didn't want minorities there, they began to be angry. How can a community of Black Americans get so successful, right? In 1920, the KKK began to invade Oklahoma, and a lot of the white residents that lived in Tulsa joined, including law enforcement and authority figures. It was very easy for them to join because they were already angry that this Greenwood community was suddenly becoming so successful. They wanted to drive Black citizens out of that community. They wanted them to leave. On May 30th of 1921, a man named Dick Rowland walked into the Drexel building to either look for a bathroom or to deliver a message. And he went into the Drexel building, got on the elevator, and at that time they had elevator operators. The elevator operator this time was a woman named Sarah Page, who was allegedly from Kansas City, and she was currently going through a divorce. When Rowland stepped into the elevator and they were riding up, Sarah Page screamed. Security guards decided to call the police. No one really knows what happened inside the elevator. Some people think that Rowland stumbled on Page and caused her to scream. Some people say that he stepped on her shoe and she shrieked. No one really knows though. Authorities got there, they interviewed Sarah, they didn't keep the documents, and immediately the newspaper, who was doing terrible journalism, by the way, came out with their own narrative saying that a Black male had been arrested for assaulting a white female. This wasn't confirmed by police yet. It was never released by the police, but the newspapers ran with it. Like I said, Rowland was arrested, and the police were getting threats. This white community was going to lynch Rowland. They wanted to lynch him. and they said that they were gonna do whatever they could to lynch him. As you can see, this horrible journalism from that newspaper caused everyone to be angry, and it gave the white community that wanted to drive these black people out of their town an excuse to do so. The sheriff, William McCullough, as well as his police officers, decided to barricade themselves in the top floor of the courthouse to protect themselves and Dick Rowland. An angry mob formed outside of this courthouse demanding they release Rowland so that he could be lynched. The black community was sitting there watching this happen, so they decided to organize themselves just in case so that they could be ready to protect Rowland and their community if need be. A source says that the sheriff, William McCullough, called on 25 men, black men, to come to the courthouse and be ready to protect them as well as Dick Rowland just in case. And so 25 men ended up showing up there with guns, using their Second Amendment rights, and they were there to protect Rowland as well as the police officers. But the sheriff, in front of everyone, he publicly denounced ever asking for this help. He turned them away and they left. After seeing 25 black men using their Second Amendment rights and carrying guns, the white mobsters decided that they wanted more ammunition and more weapons, so they went to the nearby armory and demanded they be handed weapons, which thankfully they weren't. Later that day, 75 black men returned with their weapons to the courthouse to make sure that Dick Rowland was still safe, and this angered white people because they didn't want to see the black men with guns there. A fight was breaking loose. I imagine racial slurs and cussing and all this chaos going on. A white deputy approached a black veteran from World War I. He demanded that the black veteran hand him his gun. The black veteran then refused and they began to struggle for that gun. Sadly, the gun went off and it hit one of the black men in the chest, who later was pronounced dead. When this gunshot went off, chaos broke loose. The black people decided to retreat back to Greenwood, but they were being followed by the white people who were shooting everyone that they were seeing on the streets, even if they had nothing to do with Dick Rowland or with courthouse stuff going on. So as these armed white people were going around shooting everyone that they would see, the white people that didn't have guns were being led by police officers into looting stores to find guns so that they would be able to shoot more black people. It's good to remember that a lot of these authority figures and a lot of these officers were probably involved in the KKK. So while all of that was going on, there are testimonies that say that there were airplanes going around with people shooting out of the airplane windows and aiming at the black people that were running around trying to get to their homes in Greenwood. They also threw firebombs into the buildings from above and set a lot of these buildings on fire. The National Guard was called, and when the National Guard arrived, themselves as well as police officers gathered around and organized themselves to go into white neighborhoods to protect them. They weren't there to protect black people, they weren't there to protect black communities. Nay, nay. They were there to protect white people. Eventually, martial law was established in the community and people were being arrested, but the only people being arrested were black people. There were numbers of between 600 up to the thousands of black people being arrested. Why? We all know why. Because people were racist. That's it. When these black people were arrested, a lot of them had to stay in jail until the summer, and the reason is that there was a policy in that time where if a black person went to jail, they had to have a white person come in and bail them out. And if it wasn't a white person, they couldn't be let out. This white person that would bail them out also had to promise to be responsible for whatever actions the black person took after being let out. So, of course, white people in Tulsa at this time were not going to go help out the black people that were being arrested. They were not going to help them out. So these black people unfortunately had to stay in jails until the summer when they could be let out. In total, 26 black people and 10 white people were said to be dead by the end of the rioting. Of course, now that we have more information, those numbers have gone up significantly, and the numbers sit between 100 and 300 people that died that day. The charges against Dick Rowland were dropped by Sarah Page, and the police determined that probably nothing had happened, that he had probably just stumbled into her, stepped on her shoe, something like that, and that was it. I find it sad that a lot of this could have been prevented had the police and the newspaper outlets done their research and taken the proper measures. Dick Rowland was of course let go, and it is said that he moved possibly to Kansas City, and there he lived a quiet life. Unfortunately for the people that still lived in Greenwood, the locals, they didn't have homes left and they had nowhere to go. A lot of them had to live in tents set up by the Red Cross and stay there until they could rebuild the community. Even though this happened in Tulsa, the Tulsa government didn't want to help rebuild. So they didn't get support from the local government, from the state government, or from the federal government. It was up to them to rebuild. The Tulsa government, though, saw this land as an opportunity to bring commerce into the area, to bring industrial jobs into the area. They made it very difficult for the survivors to be able to build back up. And eventually a lot of this land was sold for commerce purposes. An interesting detail that I found was that the Tulsa Race Riots were originally called the Tulsa Race Riots because insurance companies wouldn't have to pay for the damages if it was labeled as a riot instead of a massacre. So although it was a massacre, they didn't call it that just for insurance purposes because they were greedy. In total, the amount of property damage at the time was estimated to be around 1.5 million, up to several times that. Now, translated into today's money, that's around 25 million to up to twice that amount. A few days after the massacre, the Chamber of Commerce tried to raise $100,000 for the survivors, trying to be a good organization, and the city commission stopped them. I believe that they stopped them because they wanted to use this land for other purposes. They didn't really care about what the black people were going to do with their lives anymore. They didn't care. They just wanted commerce to come in. They wanted more businesses. They wanted more money. This left around 8,000 survivors homeless. So you'd think with an incident so big, with so many casualties, this would be talked about everywhere. No. Instead, there was efforts to silence the fact that it happened. Until very recently, it wasn't even in history books. In 1965, Tulsa finally decided that they didn't want segregation as part of the law of the land, and they finally took that out. 1965, that's a little late. In 1997, an official investigation was launched, and it had been 76 years since the incident, so again, a little late. In 2001, Frank Keaton, which was the governor of Oklahoma at the time, decided that it wasn't the state's responsibility to pay for the reparations of the incident. It's his city that's in his state. I don't understand. In 2003, there were efforts to sue the state of Oklahoma, the city of Tulsa, and the Tulsa Police Department on behalf of 200 living survivors. It didn't pass because it had been 80 years since the event happened and the statute of limitations had been exceeded. The statute of limitations said that a civil rights case had to be filed within 2 years after the incident happened. It had been 80 years. And in 2005, the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, mind you, said that they weren't going to listen to the case, and they didn't give any reasons. What? So their needs were being ignored by the state of Oklahoma, by the city of Tulsa, by the Tulsa Police Department, and by the United States Supreme Court now. So in 2007 and 2009 and 2012, they tried to pass a law that would extend the statute of limitations, but it didn't pass either. That's still sitting on the judiciary. It never got past that. Then in 2017, the Tulsa mayor and the Oklahoma senator at the time decided to form the Tulsa Massacre Centennial Commission. The Tulsa Massacre Centennial Commission said that the Tulsa Race Riot, the Tulsa Race Massacre, was to be talked about in all schools in Oklahoma. It wasn't really enforced though, but I mean, at least it was something. They also made a mural to let people know that this event existed, and so there's a mural in Tulsa now that talks about the event through art. In 2021, they have plans to erect the first official memorial for the survivors, and It blows my mind that this is just now happening. It blows my mind that a lot of us, including myself, are just now beginning to find out about it. And it blows my mind that while they were living, the survivors didn't get any reparations. They didn't get any justice. They didn't get anything for what they went through. They weren't even heard by the city of Tulsa, by the Oklahoma state, by the Supreme Court of the United States. They weren't listened to. I mean, I'm glad that we're learning about it now. I'm glad that it's supposed to be in history books now. I'm glad that they're erecting a memorial for them now. I just wish that while they were living, the survivors would have gotten justice. As of April of this year, there's been efforts to find mass graves in an effort to find the bodies of the victims and give them a resting place of their own. Guys, they deserve so much more than this. They deserve justice while they were alive. I know I've said it a million times, but it's what they deserved, and they didn't deserve the massacre in the first place. I mean, let's start with that. I don't know what to say, guys. Anyways, let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to leave positive messages. Make sure to let others know of this event, let others know that this happened, and make sure to be respectful to one another. I thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to share it, please do. And if you didn't like it, that's okay too. You can thumbs that down. Again, thank you for hanging out with me. Please have a good day and please stay safe. See you next time.